Welcome to the Otherweb. Our guest today is Emanuel Rose. Emanuel wrote several best-selling books, one of which focused on marketing to Gen Z people and specifically how to communicate with them and how they differ from previous generations. And another is about solitude and time in nature and how it can help us achieve better clarity and better mental health. These two topics do not seem connected until you realize that perhaps one of the ways in which Gen Z is different is that they're getting less connection to their environment and they spend more time online. Emanuel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. I'm glad to have a conversation with you.
Let's start with a simple question. You wrote a book about how to talk to Gen Zers or how to market to them. How do they differ from other people?
Well, they're the first true digital natives, right? They haven't known a day without the smartphone or the internet. And so while the rest of us have caught up in kind of integrated the tools into our lives, they have just live and breathe it. And so they have a very good filter about what is true or real or feels good to them and what is just hustle and being marketed at versus with. So that's the biggest difference.
In your experience, is that filter accurate or is it even more skewed than the filters that previous generations had?
I'm amazed that recently, in the last week, I just saw a study that said that like a rate of about 70%, they're able to tell the difference between human-generated content and AI-generated content. So let's say they have a very fine filter for what's real and what's not.
Interesting. So that is one axis, but I'm in the news industry, and so we ran a study recently about basically what kind of news people consume. Do they try to consume both sides? Do they even think that they should consume both sides?
Yeah.
Are they okay with focusing on just whatever they like? And Gen Zers were kind of the worst of the bunch, and that they didn't even think that consuming both sides is necessary, much less something that they do themselves, at least more than others, right? They're just focused on consuming whatever they happen to already agree with. They get a lot of their news from social media. I think for about 40%, social media was pretty much the only source. So does that fit your experience?
It does. And I think, there's a few things to that. One is that the age of these people is still under 26, 27, right? So there's a certain amount of self-centeredness that exists in the human being at that age. But yeah, they live in these little echo chambers that they built around themselves, right? These walled gardens. And it is fascinating how much they rely on social media, even to the point where search engines are almost irrelevant to them. So it's more likely they're going to go and do a search on social and to get some user-generated content or friends or some look at a CEO rather than go and do any research on Google themselves.
Right. So with that in mind, if I wanted to reach this group of people, either with a marketing message or with some message of how I want them to better themselves, better the world, etc., how do I do that? How do I tailor a message for that kind of individual?
Tell self-referencing stories on video and make it short because the attention span is about 2.6 seconds.
That's not a very long story.
Well, yeah, it's a short story, but so you got to work to talk about things that are important to them. They will really, obviously identity politics is important. Anything around social justice or participating in your community, anything about what you think about the people that you work with. And then lastly, about products or services. Those are the things that I'm usually coaching CEOs to bring up in these simple videos.
So this is one thing that you mentioned, being self-centered. And I understand that is a factor of age. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. I can see exactly what that works like.
Yeah.
I hope it gets better by the time somebody's 27, but you never know with the current generation. The part that I'm trying to figure out is if the recipient of the message is already somewhat self-centered and your message starts with as an X, I do Y, and then story about yourself, do they even care? Or do they stop listening if it's not about them, the recipient?
Well, I mean, we go back to the fundamentals of marketing and we say, what's in it for me is always the first line. So it has to align with something that they care about or have an image that they are interested in, or some current music, or there has to be a whole milieu of interesting things to sort of maintain focus.
So let's try to make this a little more concrete. Let's say that we have a new news service. We're trying to convince a group of younger people to consume news from us as opposed to Twitter. How do you do that?
Well, first I'd go on to Twitter. I would make sure I had a robust Twitter account. And then I would make it about environment and filming stories about puppies and some vacationing in Bali and water. Like we'd go back to the most fundamental marketing messaging, which is puppies, babies, and water, and draw in some emotion, and then integrate it into things that they care about, right? They're super interested in how they can have experiences, right? Like we just used to go and do stuff, probably a friend to go do something. Well, they have to have an experience. So having it be focused on things that can be gratifying to them socially and with new experiences that are Instagram friendly.
Interesting. It's funny, you juxtapose doing something with having an experience. And I immediately have it in my head that there's a third step, which is getting stuff done, where the doing is not even interesting. You're just getting to the end result.
Well, the irony of that is that, like, the research they do, it says, well, what do you want to happen when you grow up? And they don't want to be famous, right? They no longer want to be a football player or a singer. They just want to be famous. So, but this is not new in human culture, right? The Chinese have a saying. It says, everybody wants to shoot the bow, but no one wants to pull the string. So this idea that, instant gratification is not a new phenomenon. We just have accelerated the rate at which we can have that instant gratification over cultures that preceded us.
So let's try to dig into that. So first of all, social media versus social interactions. Is there any connection there, or is this kind of an empty substitute where essentially there is now a gap that needs to be filled some other way?
Yeah, I think there is no substitute for human interaction, right? We know this from lots of psychological studies. The babies that don't get held when they're infants, and the bad things that happen psychologically from that. We know that social media is a dopamine trigger, just like a slot machine. And so that just creates its own little rat in the cage effect for the human brain to want to keep doing the same thing. Whereas human interaction is multidimensional in the positive effects that it has. So there is no substitute. And if we can use social media as a tool, as a bridge of that gap in very measured doses, then it's an appropriate tool. It's when it takes up lots of time. It's kind of like if you're drinking all the time instead of going out with your friends, that's the problem. If you're starting to do social media instead of actually having experiences with other humans, then that's a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us.
Let's try to think about how to solve that first on a personal level and then on a societal level. So on a personal level, I know you wrote about spending time in nature a lot. I'm assuming that's a kind of antidote to the dopamine slot machine effect, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a technological detox is what some people are calling it. I just call it going outside, go camping. But yeah, the critical thing is to turn all that stuff off and listen to a squirrel on a tree and feel the wind on my face and maybe catch a fish on the fly rod, so actually touching things out in the world.
Yeah. The objection you would often hear from people is, I don't have time for this. And on a personal level, I can tell you that every time that I've tried a real detox, it is pretty difficult for the first 3 days. The first 3 days, it's almost literally like a real drug detox of some sort, right? And then from day 4 onward, suddenly you start hearing the birds and smelling everything around you and seeing stuff. But the first 3 days, it's missing this device in your hand that has substituted everything so far.
Yeah, and I think that's where just the most fundamental activity of kind of your calendar management is so critical, right? Because you have to have the space. You have to have created the space purposefully, taking care of your obligations, and then be able to entirely focus on an activity that is entirely divorced from having to use electronics.
In some sense, you have to be entirely focused on not focusing.
Well, that is, now you're starting to sound like a Buddhist.
Or like somebody who read Kabat-Zinn, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. All right, now let's think about this on a slightly grander scale. Like if I decide to do a digital detox, then okay, maybe I can make the space for that. How do you actually get people as a group to do that? Can you nudge them in this direction? Can you use social media to tell people to get off social media?
Well, you can actually. Some people are able to manage it. It's amazing, the nudge as a group is, I think, what I've tried to do with the book about the 7 principles of the magic rock was just say, hey, here's the problem. If we don't change our behavior, if we don't create an alternate kind of trajectory, not only are we going to live less valuable lives as the elders in our culture, but also these kids are doomed. The negative effects of social media and technological addiction are devastating to a human being, and we're building a whole culture of people who are in a psychological challenge that has to be solved, or it's going to be pretty dark.
Actually, I think Jonathan Haidt just released a book about this, and he's making the rounds in all the big podcasts talking about the psychological health effects of social media on younger generations.
Yeah, and it's not just on, I love his low because it's like as the old timers were, I was like, oh, those young kids are got a social media problem, but we're all dealing with it. We all want to get in there and see, oh, what news did I miss on Twitter today, or I got to get in and do this thing, or I'm always looking at the phone waiting for an email to come in. So we're all susceptible to it, but we've got to take the role as leaders and as the elders in the community and start inviting these kids to have experiences that are interesting to them and also not tethered to electronics.
I love it how you said we as the elders, and I'm thinking, wait, I'm just 39.
Yeah, the millennials don't count. It's the Z's.
In this regard, I guess I'm an old soul. I never used any social media actively for the most part. The only one that I was slightly addicted to was YouTube, but it's not social in any way, right? So basically, YouTube just got me with the slot machine effect of recommending good things to me or things that look good to me as soon as I was done watching something else. And so at some point, I noticed that the entire day between 9 p.m. and midnight just went somewhere, and I don't know what happened. And once this happened for many days in a row, I just went into YouTube, deleted all my history, all my likes, all my subscriptions. And now every time it tries to offer me something, it's not interesting. And therefore, I only go there when I have something specific to search for, like how to change the filter on a car of my model, right? YouTube is really useful for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the video training for so many of us. And lots of random things like that, right? Like you just don't know. Love it. But so yeah, you create a structure, manage the tool versus having the tool manage you. And that kind of awareness of it is not what everybody's thinking about, unfortunately.
Can we get that message out there in an effective way to say, hey, if an algorithm thinks you should watch this, you probably don't?
I don't know. Joe Rogan's shorts are pretty good, and they just keep serving them up and they're still interested.
I mean, they are, except for the fact that there's 1,500 episodes and each one has about 3 shorts, right? And so chances are they're good in moderation, just like a cookie is probably good occasionally, but not if you eat 40,000 of them in one day.
No, it's true. I had a friend who was an alcoholic, and he said, I had to quit drinking because they kept making the stuff. So it's the same. I hear what you say. All I could do is, Alex, is just tell people about my experience and how I do it, and hope that it triggers 1 or 2 people to be interested in that decide to get interested in, riding their bicycle in the mountains again, or going camping, or going backpacking, spending time in Yosemite, learning how to fly fish, just being, going river rafting, going to Europe and climbing the Alps, that there's something that they can do in their life that is fulfilling and without having to put it on Instagram.
All right. Now let's complicate things even further. All right. We were talking about how technology is replacing the real world. We are about to develop technology that replaces humans in both worlds, and at least some capacities. How should people navigate a world where humans are not the only ones creating content, essentially?
Yeah, I think I just keep going back to this concept of the tool, right? It is a tool, and our job is to use that tool in order to allow us to leverage our time better. And so for me, I look and say, well, where are the time sucks in my day as a marketing agency owner? And is there a way that I can get generative AI to write a content calendar and speed up a process that usually would take us 6 hours? Can we do that in 15 minutes and get working on something more strategic rather than this kind of rote processes? We can't rely on generative AI to produce a complete anything, right? It has hallucinations, and it has, it veers off track, and it might not be referencing what you needed to reference. So you've still got to manage it, but it can do a lot of heavy lifting for us if we use it correctly, deploy it correctly.
Yeah, and I should mention, deploying it correctly often can allow you to use the structure itself to basically preclude any of the bad things that happen with it, right? So you mentioned hallucinations, right? There's two primary reasons why it hallucinates. The first one is it was trained on the internet, and the internet is mostly junk, right? So occasionally there are things that AI thinks are true, but they just aren't, right?
Yep.
And then the other one is, if you look at the large language model, essentially it's been trained to just predict the next word, right? Because the entire training process is giving it a sentence with one word corrupted and having it guess which word's missing, right? So it knows how to predict the next word. And so if you ask it to write 1,000 words, it predicts the first one with some degree of error. Then it predicts the second one under the assumption that the first one was correct. So now the degree of error increased, and it keeps increasing with every word. And so by the time you get to word number 1,000, now the error is quite large. And it could be that even if the model was actually trained on the correct answers, it will still hallucinate if the answer is long enough. So the way you can preclude that is, well, don't ask it to answer from previous knowledge. Give it the source of the answer right there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's one of the things that we do. We never ask AI to write an article, but how about synthesizing one article from 3 existing ones? Why not?
Yeah. Right.
It can do it pretty well.
Yeah. So I use a tool called Avia, and I uploaded all my books into Avia, and then I asked it to answer questions at me from things I've already written, and even that, maybe it's 80% good. It saved me time, and I can clean it up and make it perfect after.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're halfway towards digitizing your own brain in some sense.
Yeah, I'd say the history, my brain's history, right? So as a human being, we have to be committed to learning constantly, and so until Elon's finished his little implant game, I still have to be able to put the finished products in, because I'm thinking and doing and experiencing new things as a growing, changing human being.
Yeah, we can also explore the Jan LeCun argument, let's say, which is that the only thing that you digitized are the word-based outputs of your brain, right? But your inputs were much higher resolution, right? It was vision, it was smell, it was feeling. You didn't digitize any of those. And so it's not even clear that if the model is able to represent your words perfectly, it knows any of the stuff you knew while writing it.
Right. It's like the scene in Good Will Hunting, right? Or Broadway's are saying, well, you just don't know what it smelled like in there and what it felt like. And yeah, And I think that's the challenge, is that the way that our brains work is that if the chemistry is right, it feels like we're having these experiences in this virtual way, but then there's still, you still feel that gap, or what's missing from just having these virtual experiences. It's not a full, complete emotional ecstasy of experience.
I had the same argument with VR back in the day.
Yeah.
There was this hype cycle in 2015, 16.
Right.
I was actually the VP engineering of a VR camera company. And I was supposed to be a big believer. I was in the industry. I depended on that success. But whenever somebody asked me, do you think this time VR is happening? My immediate question back to them was, can you smell in VR? If not, can you taste in VR? Can you feel with your hands in VR? Like, if you don't have any of that, it's not quite R. The reality is not there yet, right? It's emulating some of the senses. But I keep thinking we have to create those other elements. And there's been attempts, right? You have haptic gloves that at least give you some feeling, right? We used to have smell-o-vision in the 70s, where you could watch television and it would actually create some smell that matches the scene you're watching. Maybe we need that in a VR headset. I don't know.
I'll be happy to just be able to turn this computer off and go outside and don't have the smell-o-vision out there.
Well, some experiences, yes. What if you wanted to experience war? I doubt you would actually want to go there, right?
No, not interested in that so much.
Yeah, sorry, I'm involved in a few regions in the world that have conflicts right now. And so war is kind of on the mind of a lot of people that I know.
Yeah, understood.
It's not something you want to experience, but hey, if you wanted to be in there for 5 minutes, maybe a real VR system would be useful. I know they use that for treating PTSD and soldiers that come back from battle, right?
Yep. Yeah, and so same in the casinos. They pipe in smells, pipe in oxygen, so that you can stay awake and linger longer.
So how do we connect all of these threads and actually reset the world into something where people are more connected to their environment?
Well, I think the challenge that we have, again, is to partition these tools into work activity and into ways that we can leverage our time and get the benefit of them versus having them run us. And then that frees us up to go and have experience out in the real world separate from that.
I keep going back to that, but suppose I'm a believer, but how do I convince others as well?
I think you have to have your story. You have to tell your story about what you're doing and what your hope is for your children, and engage these higher purposes that people have that may be dormant. That's the only way.
So basically, I need to look happier than the guy I'm trying to convince.
No, I mean, John Daly is a great example. He's not happy, but he's an influencer. He guy smokes cigarettes. He's an alcoholic. He's, obese, but he's telling his story. And so if you tell your story, and then you will develop a cadre of people who are interested to hear it.
Are interested to hear it, but are they interested in emulating it? I think there's quite a few influencers who are basically like watching a train wreck. You don't emulate them. You're watching them because you want to see what happens to the poor slob next.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. There's always the traffic accident to watch, but we also have to have these inspirational stories to stretch us forward in human consciousness.
All right. Last question. I always want to end on a hopeful note. Suppose we turn the corner, we start doing everything right. What does a bright future look like with this technology and with still being connected to our environment in a better way?
The bright future would be the kind of like the house cleaning robot that would take care of cleaning your house, ordering your food, getting it delivered by a robot, and offload about 15 hours for a week that we have maintain our houses, and then we could spend that time writing poetry or meditating or reading great works of history and having conversations in a plaza over good wine and grapes and nice cheese. And figure out how we're going to continue to use tools for the benefit of humans.
The cynic in me immediately thinks of that and thinks, the first part you described Wall-E, right? And so why wouldn't the second part also be Wall-E? And we would just be sitting somewhere without even getting up with a tube feeding us and watching whatever it is that somebody's showing us.
I mean, that's the Matrix too, right? I mean, we do have that. We have that. It's always got to be a choice. As human beings, we're choosing good or we're choosing or darkness. And so my goal is always to use these tools so that it free me up to do more things that are making the world a better place for my grandchildren.
So we want to use tools to free up our time and then use it for something other than sinking it back into the tools.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, Emanuel, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate this little meandering talk. It was very fun.
This has been another episode of The Otherweb. Join us next time for more meandering talks about media, journalism, knowledge, and everything in between.